When Forest Church, the minister of All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City, and the author of several wonderful books, and one of my mentors, when he fell ill with esophageal cancer, he wrote his beloved congregation apologizing for sending his message so impersonally. But the letter was so gracious, I was brought to tears. Toward the end of the letter, he says, "The best thing you can do to bolster my already high spirits is to carry on all of your good works, continue to expand our ministries during this critical period in the life of our nation and world, worship to a fare thee well, and keep the budget balanced." And then he says, "As for my 3 mantras, do what you can, want what you have, and be who you are. I practice each and every day, feeling myself blessed beyond measure." It was only years after that I was struck by the unflagging cheerfulness of this letter, filled with love, and there was no mention whatsoever of the challenges he was going through. And sure, it's not the role of a pastor to seek emotional support from their congregation. But as a pastor myself, I've wondered why so many people, especially men, have such a hard time talking about emotional pain, especially when it comes to grief and loss. There's a cultural norm many of us follow to never turn to others, certain that bearing our own pain quietly is better than opening up and sharing just how awful it is to lose something or someone we love. Is it because we Americans have few people with whom to confide, or is there something more? I was 13 years old and a Boy Scout. In my troop, the older boys liked to swear, drink, and talk about girls. And across town, there was another troop where their scoutmaster was a colleague of my father at the local university. His 3 boys were members, and I loved gathering with them. The older brothers, Peter and Daniel, they were both Eagle Scouts. They were 2 slim, tall guys who were attentive, cheerful, focused. And their younger brother, Jason, was my age, and I marveled at what kind of older brothers he had, for Peter and Daniel hosted activities for us younger teens. And one of my most vivid memories was playing capture the flag over an expansive park, and afterwards gathering together for a service project. And with them, I experienced an intense sense of community and fun and service. Unlike the gatherings of my own troop, there was no bravado or sneering, as the tone was set by Peter and Daniel. These guys were special, kind, thoughtful, and fun. In Bakersfield, California, role models like this seemed few. I'll never forget that day, that morning, when my father approached me. I can still remember how the living room looked and where I was standing when he said, "Alan, there's something I should tell you. Peter, Daniel, and Jason were coming home from a ski trip Sunday night. There was a terrible accident. All 3 of them were killed. I thought you should know." I said, "Oh," and my father walked away. As I stood in the living room, I thought I probably should feel something because this was terrible, really terrible. But I didn't feel a thing. I understood that I would never see these great guys ever again. And it was years, actually decades, 30 years, before I mourned their deaths and grieved the loss of the community that they had created for me. I did what many of us are taught by example. I retreated to an emotional isolation. I suppressed my experience of grief, never thought about them, and hid my own vulnerability. I wouldn't truly grieve their loss until 12 years into my ministry. And it happened when I was on a personal retreat. And on that first morning, I woke up. I happened to be in Oaxaca, Mexico. And I woke up in this hotel room with a powerful vision of the faces of Peter, Daniel, and Jason, all smiling down on me. And I began to sob. And I sobbed uncontrollably for what seemed like hours. I cried for their parents, their devoted parents whose marriage didn't survive. I cried for Peter, Daniel, and Jason, how their 3 lives of tremendous potential were cut short. And I cried for their gift of community that touched many young people, a gift that I experienced as suddenly and irrevocably taken away. And this was the last thread of grief that opened me up to the core. And I cried for me. I cried for what I had loved and lost. I cried for how I distanced myself for so many years from their precious gift. And as I sobbed, I could feel the wall of my heart being lifted. And since then, waves of grief have come. And I've come to see that Peter and Daniel and Jason are not lost to me. And once I grieved their deaths and entered the pain of what their loss meant for me, I realized that I never lost their gift. I only lost sight of it because of the clamping down of my own heart, because of my emotional isolation. And ever since I began grieving their loss, my faith in fostering the kind of community I experienced with them simply grew exponentially. And now it's as if their spirits walk with me. It's as if they walk with me as I actively foster community that provides safety and space for play and adventure and connection. The 2 people whose photos are on our altar that I brought today had such an extraordinary impact on my life. Of course, my mom, Pam Taylor, that goes without saying. And she was actually like many of you women who are here. That's one of the reasons I love this congregation. There's so many people who remind me of my mom, generous and fun and engaging. And the other is Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs. He was like a spiritual father to me. I would not have become a Unitarian Universalist minister unless I had encountered him. In one of the first sermons I heard from him, he addressed the topic of suffering. He said we shouldn't ask why we suffer. He said that's a question that doesn't have an answer. Don't ask why we suffer. Instead, focus on how we suffer. How. The how lives in the we. For suffering in isolation is a type of hell. Suffering in community is liberating. Only in relationship with others do we ultimately know that truth, that we are not alone. You are not alone. Perhaps I'll share more of what I learned from Rob in another sermon someday, but today I want to talk about grief and remembering well. Because we often don't do grief well here in the American culture. We often stuff it, ignore it, deny it. And I love how the Mexican culture does it with the Day of the Dead, and how many African Americans will affirm what Issei Maria Barnwell penned in today's song, that we are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreaming. And today, one of the readings came from Reverend Mark Mosher DeWolf. He was one of the very first openly gay men ordained into the Unitarian Universalist ministry, and the first in Canada in 1980. And he died of AIDS in 1988, but touched many people during his short ministry. I loved what he says. Know that the love which blooms inside you is stronger than fear. Know that the love inside you is stronger than illness. And know that love is indeed stronger than death. These circles of love radiate out and echo back long after the stone has come to rest on the bottom. And his love continues to ripple forth. I'm close to a couple of colleagues who are very close to him. But we come to the question of, what do you love? What do you love that you have lost and are not connected to because you have yet to grieve? Perhaps it wasn't an experience of community, but instead a vision you shared with others. Maybe a kind of innocence. Your fidelity. What do you love that you have distanced yourself from? That you need to reclaim by finding a way of opening up to the inner sanctuaries of your heart. It's funny how we human beings can help one another answer those questions. If my father had been aware how his actions of telling me about something horrible and then walking away and never speaking of it again, if my father had been aware of just how traumatizing this was for me, I suspect he would have faced his own grief for my sake. But that's the curse of emotional isolation. We human beings often don't even recognize what should be obvious. And I, emulating his own response to pain, didn't share anything with him or anyone else. And at times I've been similarly oblivious to others' pain. But if my father would have been aware that a loving response would have been to be present with me, to sit with me, to offer a hug, just as my mom did at other times, but she wasn't around at that time, I'm sure he would have made the space for me to express my sense of loss. He would have cried with me. But this isn't something we human beings easily learn, particularly men. My grandmother Carlson, my mom's mother, her last 7 months were in bed because she was paralyzed on half of her body. When I would come home from seminary, I would bring out the hymnal and sing to her. And in December, I sang a bunch of the Christmas carols. And she said, "Oh, that's nice, honey, but you changed the words." And when she died, my grandfather, who had been by her side every single day, even though my grandmother was not a good patient, was not fun to be around, he was there every day. And when she was gone, he would often tear up. And my mom would get up and just give him a hug. And another time I was back from seminary, because I would come back once a month and preach at the Bakersfield Fellowship. My mom said to my dad while we were having lunch, "You know, my father thinks that you think he's crazy, because when he tears up, you don't say anything. You just look away." And my dad says, "Well, I don't know why he'd think that." And I said, "Well, Dad, Grandpa was just telling me the same thing, that when when he gets teary, you just turn away. You don't say anything." And he says, "Well, there's nothing intelligent to say." He said, "So what are you preaching on this Sunday?" I said, "Dad, just this subject. In the face of human suffering, there is nothing intelligent to say. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a response." And it was not that long before that I had actually confronted my father. I had confronted my father about how I felt like he didn't see me. He just didn't have any emotional affirmation. And he was this extraordinary intellectual who read so much, clearly cared for his family, but I didn't feel it. So I told him. And his response floored me. He burst into tears. And he says, "Let's go for a walk." And through tears, he shared with me, "Alan, I just can't connect with my emotions a lot. And I think it comes in part from when I was 10 years old. And my 2-year-old sister, Elizabeth, got sick and she died. And after the memorial service, Elizabeth's name was never spoken again." And he said, "And when my father was dying, my mother convinced me not to go out, to fly across the country and see him in a decayed state." He said, "Alan, I have never forgiven myself for not saying goodbye." He loved me so much that he got that out. He connected so deeply to his pain and let me know why he is the way he is. And it was after that conversation that ended with, in the face of human suffering, there is nothing intelligent to say, that he began to change. And that when I would come back to Bakersfield, I would hear from people how he was there for them. "Dad? Wow!" And it happened time and again. He was there. He learned just to be with people. We human beings are capable of growing. But sometimes it takes a really painful thing to transform us, to connect with the love that's always been there. And I believe that learning how to remember well is one of the best ways of reconnecting. Even remembering the most painful things, because not all of us have had parents that have supported us. But being able to acknowledge and move through that pain and recognize, oh, they must have been suffering so much for treating their children as they treated them. Doesn't excuse it, but it allows us to let go. Once we can be real. And that's one of the main reasons we're here in community, is to be real with one another. Not every day, maybe not during coffee hour. It's hard to be real at that time. Really real. But even possibly, or staying here for an hour or two, or getting together with folks one-on-one, or finding a small group. It's my hope to cultivate a small group program here for honest connections. But I wanted to share all of this. I know it's a lot. But it's real. And I know a lot of you have gone through a lot of pain as well. And I want to be of support to you if you have not gotten to where you want to be. And I want to rejoice with you if you have. Because that's what it means to be an authentic religious community. May we remember well. Blessed be. Amen.
Visit us at UUSG.org.